Okay. So, what do you want to do? Do I want to just sort of start off? Where's the questions gone? I hadn't opened a minute ago.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, if I can just throw them at you. So I mean,
Yeah, you ask away and I'll answer.
okay. So how did you get into brewing?
Well, I joined brewing because I was doing A levels at school, and I was doing botany and zoology. It really this was in the late 60s, so I was just 18, and it was, I think I did my A levels in 68, and I wanted to I was doing botany, zoology, chemistry, and initially physics, which I dropped. But I probably wasn't going to go to university. But I think in those days, not so many people went straight off to university or went to university. Certainly not from my sort of background and surroundings. So I looked around for jobs involving the science, which I really enjoyed at school, and I applied to a couple of brewers. I applied to Watney's and to Truman's to join them in their laboratory. I had an interview at Watney's and I wasn't successful there, but I was successful at getting a position as a lab technician in the laboratory at Truman's. So that would have been in the summer of 68, really. So I joined literally straight from school. I sat my A levels and I started at Truman's within a week, pretty much.
All right.
So
And how long did you stay working in the lab?
I was about a year, nearly 2 years, all told, in the lab, year and a half to 2 years. But funny enough, it was and I was reminded of this. We were talking about the Beano, and I'll probably tell you a little bit more about Truman's at the time, as was. But we went on this marvelous Beano from Truman's, which was all the staff in the brewery and all the depots and both breweries, although the Burton brewery had its own Beano, but all the London and the South of England depots in West Burgolt and Gravesend, all the old Truman breweries, or breweries which had gone into the Truman fold at that time. We decamped, and they booked 2 trains from Victoria, and we went to Margate. And there were about 1,200 people on this trip to Margate, and it was great. And we arrived, and on the train there were cases of beer. We arrived down at Margate, where Truman's had a stores, and they had a big marquee down there with breakfast and more beer, and they gave us a 10 shillings and an entry ticket into Dreamland for spending money. So off we went and did the fair. And anyway, I ended up having lunch, including oysters, with some of the brewers at the time. And they said, well, one of their lads on the brewing team was leaving to move on to back into his family brewery, in fact. And would I be interested in coming down and joining the shift brewing team? So having had a year and a half in the lab and getting round, and I agreed. So I joined towards the end of 1969.
Okay.
Probably worth mentioning at this point the sort of setup at Truman's, because Truman's was it was still independent. It was still Truman, Hanbury and Buxton. And it was this quite large site in the East End of London, just off Brick Lane, or straddling Brick Lane. In fact, it forms the majority of parts of Brick Lane. There are close on 15 acres in total. There was a bottling stores down the road. And it was very much a big old rambling, well, Victorian, Edwardian stroke, going right back to almost Charles II, I think. It was reputedly started on that site in 1666, or parts of it started round about then. And it was this incredible place that had just grown and structured. In the middle of the brewery was this amazing sort of facade of a Queen Anne house, with bits of tubing coming in and out of it, and vessels behind it all round, and it was an absolute warren of a place. And I fell in love with the place. It was chaotic, it was scruffy and a bit run down in places, but it was just a real treasure trove of fun and knowledge, really. So.
And so had you learnt much about brewing when you'd been working in the lab?
Yeah, well, you get an understanding of the basics as what going in. I went in pretty green, and the team there were very good about helping me and guiding me and telling me about what I was doing. If you asked the right questions, people were more than happy to answer. So, yeah, no, it was really good. They did encourage us to go along at the time. The Institute of Brewing were running exams, although I didn't start them at this stage. But we were encouraged to go down to Cass College, which was down in the city, Sir John Cass College, where there were technical lectures organised by the major breweries, one a month for sort of 8 months of the year. And we were encouraged to go down on that. We were encouraged to read about what was going on. There's sort of a basic grounding there, very much practically orientated though. In this big, the brew houses of the day in those days were pretty big with multiple vessels. And brewing, really, we only brewed, unlike modern brew houses, we only brewed once a day. There were two sides to the brewery, what we called two sides to the brewery, the porter side and the ale side, which was a bit of a hangover from the days when they were brewing. Obviously, Truman were one of the major porter brewers. You can tell me all about that. But we still called it the ale and the porter side. And the brew would start at either 5 or generally 6 in the morning. And we had 8 mash tuns. 3 of them, 2 of them were smaller, but 6 fairly big 10-ton mash tuns. And the smaller ones we used for coloured malts, and we mashed them all in more or less at the same time. So you end up brewing somewhere in the region of just over, in terms of volume, just over about 2,000 barrels, in a single brew. There were 6 coppers, so you run from mash tuns into coppers, and we did a lot of party guiling, that wonderful process of making lots of different beers from the basic same raw materials.
Yeah, so I was going to say that each of the mash tuns, apart from the ones that have the coloured malts in them, they'd be mashing for the same beer or the same party guile.
Well, there would be probably 2 streams. So in the early days, we were still doing a lot of brown ales and milds. So we would have probably had 2 or 3 of the mash tuns would have been running a brown ale mild, possibly a stout brew, whereas the other side, they were all in the same room. They were all we could pick and choose. They just differentiated when they went out into either side of the brewery. And then the other 3 would have been running, and they would have run them together. So what it meant is that your first boil, because you've got 3 mash tuns all running together, feeding, probably you'd certainly have used 2 coppers for a brew, if not 3, and you would refill it. But the coppers were quite big. They also had collecting pans on top, work receivers effectively built in on top of them. Not all of them, but quite a few of them.
This is like the one they've got at Fuller's.
Exactly. With the collecting pan on top, and that's a small version of what we had. And the collecting pan at Fuller's is open, but the ones at Truman's were, you could walk on them. Or they were all encased, and the coppers were often encased in brick as well for energy. And you'd start running, the first coppers come up quite quickly because you've got all this work running constantly. But that ran almost throughout the morning, so from 6 through till 6, sometimes till 12, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where you're still running the worts into the kettles, and then from the kettles it's boiled, goes into the hop back, which is, and it was built on, still because of its age, it was built on a tower principle. So the mills were at the top of the building, coming down to the grist cases, coming down to the mash tuns, and then elevated again to the coppers, and then dropped down into the hop backs. And the mash tuns actually discharged. They were up on the first level, and they discharged literally by pulling a plug out, and chutes going to the arches underneath the front of the brew house, where the spent grains vehicles would pull in underneath to receive the spent grains. And the guy, the grain merchants used to, the spent grain merchants, the blokes who drove the vans also jumped in and dug out the grains. And
really?
Yeah, and they'd have a bucket on the hold constantly outside the mash tun and to keep their fluids up. And they were good. I mean, they could get a mash tun out in not much time. Yeah, it was quite impressive.
And so, going back to mashing, I mean, what sort of mashing scheme was being used then? Was it
the Steels mashers?
Okay.
Yeah, so single infusion mashing with Steels mashers. Grist cases, we'd have one Steels masher between 2 mash tuns, so you'd have to mash one and then switch it over. But because there were 6 of them, you could get them all, well, half of them going at once, and then you and do the other half afterwards. Yeah, no, it was so
internal rakes.
No rakes, not
okay.
There were rakes in the 2 small ones, Ron. Okay. So in the coloured malts, they had rakes, and like you see in Belgium, where the rakes are, they're not rakes like a lauter tun that go round. They're the ones that chop it up that way. You see them in whiskey distilleries, so they go around like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so they go round, but also turn that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah. Yes. I'm trying to think of what's the brewery in Brussels?
Cantillon?
Cantillon, yeah. I think they've got them in Cantillon still.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. I've not been there, so it's on my list of places to go.
No, I've not been there either. So
really? No. It's only down the road from you.
Yeah, well, never got round to it. So anyway, when you started as a brewer, did you start studying immediately to do brewing exams?
No, I was quite immature, I think is the way I always put it. So I ended up sort of going, and I made a half-hearted start, and then got involved in other things, shall I say, including a winter sport. So all of that was put on abeyance, really, all the studying, and I ended up sort of the brewery were great, and they helped support me. It started off, but because we worked shift, I could arrange things so that all of my holidays occurred in the winter and things. So I was off for sort of sometimes about 7 or 8 weeks before Christmas, and something similar afterwards, if I could work it out that way. So that sort of thing. So I didn't really start formally doing the exams. I did sign up with the Brewers Guild, and I did sign up for the Institute of Brewing a bit more latterly. So I didn't really start the brewing exams until I was a bit later into my later 20s. So towards the end of them.
Okay. What was the textbook you used for that?
Oh, it was Huff, Briggs and Stevens, and that was everybody's textbook.
Okay.
But before that, if you continental brewers would look at Leclerc and the British guy, it would come to me. I've got a copy in the other office.
Lloyd Hines.
Sorry,
Lloyd Hines.
Lloyd Hines. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I've got about 2 or 3 copies of Lloyd Hines, and I still look at Lloyd Hines, and there's still stuff in there which is relevant and fascinating, I must say. So yeah, I mean, I sort of was a bit lackadaisical about doing that. I mean, I did quite a few courses within the brewery, not specifically brewing. They put me on various management courses and things and development. But what happened, Rob? Because I started in this wonderful sort of old Victorian brew house, rambling all over the place, and Truman's, while they were still independent, put together a plan. They had two breweries, one in Burton and one in London. Both of them very inefficient, both very labour intensive, and both of them not really geared up for doing what was happening, either lager brewing nor for keg ale brewing, which is the way the market started to go. We were at the start of the 60s, sort of the start of things like the Truman, the Whitbread Trophy coming in, Tankard coming in, and Watney's Red Barrel and Worthington E and Double Diamond and all of these keg beers coming and starting to dominate, really, the decline of cask ale. Not surprising given the quality of some of the cask ale. We might cover that if we've got time. We're going to run out of time today, I can tell you, because there's a
So were Truman still brewing cask beer at the time when you joined?
Oh, very much so. We were brewing bucket loads of cask beer. We were doing London Pale Ale from Burton. We would get the PA 1 and 2, they're equivalent to an ordinary bitter, and their Ben Truman Pale Ale, which was in cask format was about 4.8% ABV. And of course, they had a slightly stronger version of that for the bottled version of the Ben Truman export Pale Ale. Then down in London, we were doing lots of mild still brown ales, light ale, lots of light ale, keepers, London Keeper, dark and mild, which was in cask and also in keg. So, I mean, most of these beers are relatively low strength. I mean, the average ABV coming out of Brick Lane at that time would have been no more than about 3.8% alcohol, really.
Okay.
The beers were coming from Burton. I mean, with the occasional stouts and things, but they weren't terribly strong either. So it was, a lot of 3% beers were being produced by us, and ordinary bitter was about. We weren't measuring ABVs often. We didn't declare on that. It was all based on OG.
Yeah.
So we had an export keg that was a bit stronger, but most of them weren't that strong.
And what did you think of the beers?
Well, I mean, on a good day, they were good. And one thing that really influenced me so enormously were two things. One I wasn't aware of, and I don't think the industry was aware of, was the difference between the beer that I was tasting, the bright beer, because starting in the lab, I used to go up and get the samples and we would taste it. And I would sample the beer at various stages going through the process. And we had bottling on site at that time, as well as down the road at lovely fields, but you could really taste the difference between beer, which from the bright tank where it was filtered and then put into bright tank, a difference between that and after it had been bottled or kegged, and it had been through either a tunnel pasteurizer or even a flash pasteurizer, but in those days they weren't terribly sophisticated. We weren't really able, it didn't come in until quite a few years later, probably from when I first started, I would say about almost 10 years, that the issues of both filtration but dissolved oxygen was really apparent, and we weren't really producing beers in a way to minimize oxygen pickup post-fermentation. If you go back in time when they had redox rooms and things, somehow there was a sort of a knowledge lost, or understanding what was going on. It was all about making the beer bright and stable. So we were pasteurizing often at quite high levels of pasteurization, with quite high levels of oxygen. So the beer just tasted dead and old at the point of going in, but the cask beers tasted good. And when you could get them, bottle conditioned beers tasted so much better, which is what prompted my sort of, in every place I've been to, is to try and recreate my early memories of those original English IPAs, things like the Worthington White Shield and some of those beers, and even the Ben Truman Pale Ale, as it used to be, in bottle, but coming from the bright tank, because it was never bottle conditioned in my time. But Guinness was, and that was the one. I mean, Guinness was truly bottle conditioned, and we bottled Guinness, so we would get it in. And we used to measure the CO2 and see it build up in tank until they put it into bottle. And then you had to sit on the bottles until they came into condition. And that was, that was really, this is, even in those days, I thought the beer is so much better. So.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful bottle conditioned Guinness. I can remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the things that sort of influenced me, really, that I didn't understand enough at the time, because it's all about getting the volume out and getting all your KPIs sorted and managing the blokes and everything else to really concentrate on, at that stage, on what the beer tasted like. That sort of came even at Truman's a little bit later, which we'll come on to.
Yeah,
going back. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go on.
You're going to have to shut me up at times if you want to ask.
No, well, I did get a warning a bit ago that there were only 10 minutes left on this meeting. So what I was thinking of doing is, when this one ends,
6 minutes. Yeah.
Right, I can just schedule another meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, now sort of thing.
Sorry?
Yeah, we'll do it straight after this one, yeah? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so let's do that. You're going to do it, aren't you? And send me another invite.
Yeah. I'll set it up. Once this one kicks us off, I'll set up another one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I had this wonderful time when I picked up shift. A little bit of a break because I broke a leg playing rugby, which was a bit inconvenient. didn't really endear me, but they still accepted me. I just fell in love with working on shift, working the way we did. I will tell you, we had a house at the brewery, brewer's house. I mean, it was a revelation to me, because you asked some questions about numbers. We could go on a long time, but there were 3 of us, but we worked shift. We would go in, for example, we would go in midday on one day. You'd probably join them for lunch maybe, or a beer in the sample room, and then you would pick up the shift, and you would cover the shift brew till it finished. The brew wouldn't finish. It started at 6 in the morning, probably wouldn't finish until sometime between 9 and 10 at night, when all the works were finally collected, because these were big brews, lots of running. But then we would stay over. We'd do what we called the midnight wave round. So we'd do the checks on the beers. There were a team of operators, brewery workers who on the fermentation team, who looked after all the fermentations, and they would draw the samples, and you'd go around and check all the fermentations. And then we had a flat in the brewery, in what was known as the brewer's house at the top. 2 bedrooms, dining room with beer. And the housekeeper was part of the canteen staff, and she would bring us food on occasions, and it was great. So we would stay overnight, and then you get a call in the morning from the gateman to wake you up at 5 or whatever time you ask them to wake you up. You sort of throw some clothes on, rush out, go and mash the brew, start the brew off, have a cup of tea with a mash tun foreman. He'd normally have a cup of tea or bother in the winter on the go. When you get down there, you mash in, and then you go around and do all the checks again on all the previous day. You check the roofs, you check the brews, you get everything going, and then you go back to the brewer's house when the housekeeper would come in and she'd make you breakfast. And then the others started coming in. So it was rather a marvelous system. And you worked then through till midday. So you almost did a sort of 24-hour shift, but you went to sleep in between. So,
Okay.
I mean, it worked out to about a 66-hour week, but they didn't seem very long weeks, I can tell you, because you always got a sort of afternoon and a morning off the next day. So it was great fun. And you'd move in for the weekend, you'd be there all weekend and you just go around and do the checks. So you just moved in, you treated it like home.
Okay.
Different world. But anyway, this world, unfortunately, Truman's were independent. They decided to build the new brewery. We started to build the new brewery as we were building the new brewery, which was of what you would recognize today as a modern brew house, a German brew house, with mash conversion, followed by a lauter tun, followed by a kettle, followed by what was originally hotbacks, later converted to whirlpools. And you would just mash and do 8 brews a day, or if you tried to push it 10. We were based on 8 brews a day. We never really got more than 8 brews a day, and all into cylindrical chronicles. So and no real party dialing. There was a little bit, but we had big vessels, and the whole concept of the place was moving us into the 20th century as they were. Truman's at this time, and here we've got 2 minutes. So the politics now come into this, Ron, that were happening throughout the industry. You're probably aware of the stories, I'm sure, of people trying to break into the beerage.
Yeah.
Charlie Claw. Well, the first person that really broke into the beerage, that really took it apart, really, was Maxwell Joseph. And he put in a bid. Watney's, who were one of the big 6, we were outside of the big 6 at the time. Watney's, in their view, came to our defense, and there was a big takeover battle with the directors and a lot of the staff actually supporting Maxwell Joseph. But of course, what Maxwell Joseph had seen was the value of the property that the breweries were sitting on. And that really started an enormous change in the industry, because he was able to take over Truman's in about 72, I think it was, or maybe 73, immediately revalue his assets, and do a reverse takeover bid on Watney's, which he got away with. And he took over what was considered only 6 months before almost inconceivable. And he took over Watney's, and change after change, we became Watney Man, Truman Brewers, Grand Met Brewing, etc., etc. But in the meantime, back at the ranch, we were closing the old brewery. They brought the wrecking balls into the old brewery, rambling old brewery, into this rather modern, very soulless modern brew house. And we've got less than a minute, so we're going to disappear. So that's a sort of a good opportunity